My name is Becca, and I have beaten the often path by creating a new method of contacting emergency services.
Welcome back to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer. On this show, we showcase unusual success stories to help us see the bigger picture in our lives and our careers. My goal is to help you find your life's work and mission, to get outside of thoughts like, I'm just going to make as much money as I can, and start thinking about having a sense of purpose and greater good in your own life. And along those lines, my guest today is Becca Hume, the founder of TapSOS. Now, a chance encounter with a deaf coworker when she was working in retail at the age of 16 led her down a path that would ultimately see her founding a company to give persons with disabilities access to emergency services. Now, if you're able to speak or hear, you take for granted that you can just pick up the phone and dial 911 here in the US or 999 where she's from. But for 650 million people with disabilities around the world, these moments are not easy, or they're even impossible. She's made it her life's mission to change the outdated emergency support systems, fundamentally improving the way we all get access to help when we need it most. Oh, she's also developing a second product for victims of domestic abuse, a trend that has sadly increased dramatically during the global pandemic. In short, she's on one of the most noble missions you can possibly imagine, and I can't wait for her to tell you her story today. So here's Becca Hume, creator of TapSOS. Well, welcome, Becca. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I hope you are well. Where are you calling in from?
Thanks very much for having me. I'm calling from Northern Ireland in a town called Belfast.
A town called Belfast. Okay, we're reaching all over the world with this podcast, which is great. I can hear your accent. You can hear my accent, although I think yours is much nicer than mine.
That's definitely up for debate.
Yes, everybody loves the Irish accent, I think. It's wonderful.
No.
Yes, I do. I think most Americans do, for sure.
Everyone but ourselves, but yes, it's quite popular.
Isn't that the way it always is with people?
Yeah.
The grass is always greener, I'm sure. So you have been up to some really fascinating stuff. I came across your project, TapSOS, and I was instantly drawn to it, and I was drawn to your story. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your story? So what have you done? What are you up to?
Sure. So it really all began when I was 16. I had an idea kind of pop into my head. I was working in retail while I was studying in school and going through uni. So I was in a retail job for like 9 years. And it was there that I met a colleague who was deaf. At this point, I'd never experienced communicating with somebody who was deaf or hard of hearing. So it's really new to me. And at the time, my manager, when he tasked me to go and speak to my colleague, didn't mention he was deaf and just said, go and speak to Nigel. So off I went. And it was a new store and I was completely new at that age. It was my first time job. So I was quite panicked about how I was to do everything. But I was told he'd be wearing a high-vis vest. So off I went looking for this guy.
So they just sent you off with no warning? That's kind of
no
cool.
Warning. I know, I've often thought about it. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? I'm still unsure, but there are good and bad things linked to it. But off I went, saw a guy in high vis and started speaking to him. And he didn't turn around. He was standing with his back towards me and I was chatting away. No idea. And the closer I got to him, I just sort of nudged him because I realised he hadn't been turning around. So I just did a wee gentle tap while I was speaking again. And he jumped around. I clearly gave him a fright. And he signed that he was deaf. And at that point, I was like, oh, right, okay, what am I meant to do? This is completely new to me. So he gestured just to get a pen and paper. That's how I would communicate going forward. And we had a conversation. And at the end of it, as he was kind of writing things back and forth, I had a lot of time to think. And at that time, I was like, I'm going to learn sign language because that's what Nigel would use. So I wrote this in a bit of paper and he just kind of rolled his eyes and shrugged his shoulders.
Sure, another one.
Maybe, yeah, people maybe said this before.
Right.
But I did. I kind of set off on a little mission was to find out where I could learn sign language. So fast forward a couple of years, I studied sign language at a college for 8 years, just really enjoyed it and worked through the different levels. But I suppose me personally, my passion was in design and I was then going into university to study design. And just having this kind of daily communication with Nigel. I just asked more questions and pulling together the design aspect and then seeing all these needs and challenges. And it made me just kind of think about how can things improve both products and services for the deaf community. I could go into so many stories about Nigel and the deaf community alone, but that's kind of just what sparked the conversation and so I suppose my thought process as to what can be done here. And I was getting a lot of stories about like difficulty contacting emergency services. There just when times when people need it most. There was a few friends of mine. So later on, after learning sign language, I was getting really involved with the deaf community, and I met a lot of friends, and I was hearing their stories. One in particular was about a fire outside her house, and it was the middle of the night, and she wasn't aware, and would use a hearing aid, and so wasn't able to telephone 999 here in the UK, and text her mum, and her mum then did it. I just thought, here's an opportunity for something to improve. Why is this not possible? And what can be done? And I think it's just really to allow people a bit more independence. So that kind of sparked the whole journey and idea. But a little bit of background about myself there.
That's a wonderful story. So when you tapped him, little did you know what a prescient moment that would be, right?
Oh, I know. I know.
You tap and you say, hey. And then years later, you've got this great idea for TapSOS. So 8 years to learn sign language. Is that fairly typical? Does it typically take that long? And would you say that you're fluent at that point?
Yeah, it would take that long. I think you work through levels, and typically a level would be 1 year. Now in the UK, we use British Sign Language, so it's not often kind of widely known that it's not a universal language. Each region has their own. So there's American Sign Language, Irish Sign Language, British Sign Language. So here, where I'm based, I'm kind of on the border between knowing Irish Sign Language and British Sign Language. But yeah, it's just one of those things that you kind of can do it in chunks. But every time I finished one level, I was just kind of wanting more. And it's a bit like learning a spoken language. If you're not using and practicing it, it's very easily forgotten.
So would you be thinking that American Sign Language is, can you understand it, but it has an accent, or is it something that you can't understand at all?
There's certain things that look familiar. The big difference is British Sign Language use two hands for a lot of the communication. American Sign Language would be one-handed, which can be quite handy. Irish Sign Language is also one-handed, which is handy whenever you're holding a cup and drinking or eating, or multitasking is
on the go.
Ideal.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's definitely a really vibrant and colourful language. For me, I'm dyslexic, and so I think I maybe picked it up a bit easier because I really heavily rely on visual communication, and so seeing the conversation happen was just ideal for me. That worked really well.
Okay, so you got this idea, and then is it safe to say that you kind of fell in love with sign language, the process? Because surely to continue for 8 years, you must have latched onto something new or felt something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I just felt really compelled. When I had that communication bar, I felt a bit of guilt. Mainly because I couldn't communicate in the way that he did. And as well, I was observing in the workplace how he was very isolated and often just left out. You would see a lot of the males in the workplace joking about football scores, kind of 2-1 and holding up fingers and doing gesture, and kind of just fun kind of conversation, but nothing deep and meaningful. And you could tell that was really impacting and kind of just how he felt in the workplace. So that, I suppose, left an impression on me, just to think, how can you be more inclusive? And I wasn't setting off to do a big, massive, kind of world-changing product or service kind of transformation. It was just like an exploration. I just kind of set off a bit of an idea and a journey for myself, thinking, what can be done? What can I do? So learning sign language was the first thing, just because I wanted to be able to speak to him in the workplace. When we're on our lunch break or coffee break, I wanted to be able to have a conversation. I didn't have, at that point, any idea that TapSOS would ever be a thing.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to go about that. And I'm not business-minded, so it was very much just, I've got something in my mind and it's something I'd like to do.
That's so wonderful. I love it when people who aren't business minded see something in their own personal life and then just make that leap for whatever reason to decide to do something about it. So kudos to you. That's fantastic. So you notice that there are a number of areas where these people are being left out from daily life, obviously. So what made you zero in on the problem that you ended up solving?
Um, I think it was just because it was an industry that hadn't been touched. You know, it was, first of all, the personal stories of kind of just people relying on other people. Another friend of mine was in a car accident, and he was profoundly deaf, and he relied on the other individual who crashed into him to phone police and report the problem. So
Oof.
instantly you're having
Ouch.
something that might not be factually correct.
Right.
So I
Legal
was
landmine.
hearing, yeah, absolutely. I was hearing all these stories and thinking, okay, let me explore how the emergency services operate here in the UK. It's quite similar across the world, but focused on the UK at the minute. Just looking at how control rooms operate, who takes all those calls, what else is available if you can't telephone. And so that opened up a new discovery. So here in the UK, you can either telephone 999 or text. And the text service was only introduced in 2009, so it's relatively new. So before that, you didn't have an option to communicate. It was just telephone. And I know in America, some states still don't have a text option. I think that it was introduced in 2011, and there's still areas that don't have that. So in a way, we're quite leading in comparison to other countries. And the UK was actually the first country to have an emergency service, and it started way back in 1935 after a fire broke out in London, and 3 women lost their lives. And it was a doctor who created kind of an emergency system, and it just grew from there. And then it was just repeated across the world as a really good system to have. So that's quite exciting for me personally, living here, just identifying, yeah, okay, we might be ahead of the game, but actually in terms of other technology and digital transformation in other industries, so behind. You can only telephone and text already, that's quite outdated. And I just could see how, particularly for the deaf community who are just emerged in technology, because a really good tool for them across all areas of life, just be able to kind of video each other, to use sign language in their communication rather than text. You find that the deaf community are, kind of early adopters in technology. And so particularly for them, and also the rest of us, emergency services just had to come along with the times and had to be updated.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick little detour from the regularly scheduled programming here to do a little plug. We do this every time, so you shouldn't be surprised. I don't ask a lot of you. All I want, if you like this podcast, please just share it. Rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe. Share it with people who need to hear this story. These kinds of things only grow with the help of their listeners. So if you enjoy these stories and you think that there is value in this podcast, I ask that you leave a review, subscribe, rate it 5 stars, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Just do whatever you can do to help me grow it. That's it. Shameless plug. Now let's get back to this very interesting story of Becca Hume. Interesting. So it's like somebody crashes into my car and I'm deaf, and then I say, hey, call the police for me. And they say, oh, sure. They call the police. They say, he says it's his fault. Yeah. You don't know what they're saying, right?
You have no idea what could be reported.
And I think from your website, so disability affects 15 to 20% of every country's population. So there are at least 650 million persons with disabilities worldwide who are often left out of basic services. Have you seen the movie Crip Camp? It was on Netflix recently. It's a great movie.
I haven't.
Yeah, I don't know when it takes place, the 60s, I believe, but it's about how fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, how not naturally it came. It was set in the U.S., but things like wheelchair ramps, access to public transportation, all of these things that everybody takes for granted every day just were simply not accessible to a large percentage of the population. It's a great movie. And I think this falls into that category. So knowing that the system was broken, how did you set about creating your product?
I suppose I had a little bit of a step up. So I was studying design at university, and at that point I was doing a master's. And in the first 3 months, our tutor just said, "Think blue sky. If you could do anything, what would you do?"
Mm.
So there was no kind of pressures of having to complete something or have something assessed or marked. So I just had the freedom and space just to kind of really, if I could do anything, what could I do here? Um, so that allowed me just to kind of really look into the emergency services. Again, I have no background in this area, no background in business. Didn't think I'd set up a business. It was just, I want to help my friends. How can I do that?
Yeah.
And I like designing stuff. So if I can create like a button, if it does something, how does that all link together? But just the more I researched, Google's a wonderful thing to start. I just spent a lot of time online roaming about to see what's currently being done. Who's out there that's connected that could be some way next in my journey. I discovered quite a lot of organizations here that connect with the emergency services, who kind of pull together industry experts, government, and also the telcos who handle the calls. So it was really just kind of exploring who did I need to speak to. I haven't got the knowledge of all that and what I need to learn. And that's kind of where it started. But definitely I was starting from a point of, I have no idea what's about to come ahead.
Okay.
This is completely new.
So you're just figuring it out as you go. And you did have a few little moments where you got some assistance, right? Obviously, funding is always a huge issue anytime anybody's trying to bring an idea to market. How did that go? What kind of funding did you need and how did you get it?
I think like any business or startup business, as you say, funding is one of the most difficult things, particularly here in the UK. I think in America, the landscape's a little bit different. People take more risks, where I think we're a little bit timid here in the funding world. But locally in Northern Ireland, there are quite a few organisations who manage funds. And I was able to tap into that early on and create like a prototype and to test it. So I had small support, but it was kind of little pockets of money. I kept on applying and applying and applying. The amount of time I've spent writing applications and putting myself out there, but it has just kind of fallen in place. It hasn't gone without hard work. It's been difficult to do, but we've always kind of got a little bit more to push us to the next step and a little bit more. Just recently, actually, during 2020, we applied for Innovate UK funding, and it's quite prestigious. It would be very competitive. And we managed to get 2 rounds of funding for that, which has been fantastic. It's allowed us to branch out and develop a bit further. So that's been incredible. We are still looking for more kind of private investment for the company just to really scale up what we've currently got. So at the minute, we've just been, I suppose people would say bootstrapping, but we've had money come in to last certain points. I think in total we've raised about 350k.
Fantastic.
But there's a lot more that we could do with a lot more money.
Right. And are these primarily like government grants or are these private parties?
Yeah, primarily grants. So
Great.
we've managed to kind of keep the IP. We've had 2 small family friend investors.
Oh, wow.
And that was just by me sharing with family kind of what I'm doing. And 2 people have decided just to kind of support me more so than the business, just to say, I believe in what you're doing, go and do it.
Bet on the jockey, not the horse, yes.
Yeah, and that really helped. Not only encourage me, but get started and off the ground. And, I've found that if you can secure one, it just really snowballs and builds the traction for further follow-on funds.
Absolutely. Did you find that when you shared the idea in the beginning, people were immediately receptive or did they understand?
It's been a bit of a mix. The majority has been, oh my goodness, why is this not available already? Like, what's been the problem? Why is it taking so long? And then you have some people that would say, yeah, I can see how it works for some people, but I wouldn't maybe use it myself. And I suppose it all started by looking at the deaf and hard of hearing community. But very quickly, as we journeyed and developed, we thought it's not just beneficial for deaf, hard of hearing, speech impaired. There are multiple times whenever telephoning can be an issue. If you're taking an allergic reaction, your throat begins to swell, choking, breathing difficulties, asthma, stroke, heart attack, and the list goes on. And it can be really anything medical, situational, or physical. That's like a barrier to calling. So once we started sharing or pitching in different events, people would maybe come to me at the end of the event and say, you do mention the deaf community, but I can see how this can benefit for me. And so we really just kind of use kind of non-verbal as our messaging tool. So anyone that feels that, for whatever reason, they might be in a situation that makes it impossible to telephone, they can benefit from TapSOS.
That's so wonderful. And I think I read from your website that you said every day in the UK, the emergency services receive 20,000 silent 999 calls. What does that mean exactly?
So really, that's just a telephone number has interacted with BT call systems, and there has been no sound or response. Some can be immediately removed and it's been like what they call a pocket call. So maybe a phone has accidentally been sat on.
Yes, we have the same, yes. A butt dial. In our particularly crass fashion.
It's actually been figured out that 18,000 per year are identified as silent calls but needed emergency response. So it's quite a large daily number, but actually throughout the year, there's 18,000 of those that relied and needed 999 emergency response. So it's people maybe who had a fear of being heard on the phone, so didn't communicate what they needed. Maybe they couldn't speak because, again, they were choking, or there's been other situations that they couldn't raise their voice. And that really sat with me for a while. I kind of didn't feel comfortable with why the number was so large. And
it's shocking. I didn't know that until this. No idea about that, but I believe it.
Yeah, and I think for us, we had TapSOS at this point, but still an area kind of that I felt needed to improve was those reporting domestic abuse. Our app, as you can see, TapSOS is very obvious. You're tapping for assistance. And those who maybe experience domestic abuse can't have something so obvious on their phone. Maybe they're in a controlling environment and that app would just be deleted or removed, as well as quite obvious in the reporting. There's a few steps that you need to go through in the process of making an alert that would just maybe not be appropriate for someone who's at high risk and needs to send a message just like that. So during the pandemic, worldwide, we saw domestic abuse just on the increase. A lot of factors, one being that people were made to stay at home, and quite often for people that wasn't a safe place, and having 24/7 contact with somebody that maybe it wasn't a good environment was creating a lot more issues, and people weren't able to maybe go to support groups or just have a bit of space, but they were there and stuck. And so we saw a mixture of an increase of new reporting of domestic abuse, and people reported for the first time, and actually then a decrease of regular reporting. So people who previously would have maybe alerted police couldn't anymore because they were having this 24/7 monitoring and observation going on.
Ouch.
So overall it increased, but I think there was a lot more going on behind closed doors that just couldn't be reported. That's something we are looking at to try and bridge the gap. We're trying to allow people the access to report it so that it can be done quicker and dealt with quicker.
So we're talking about two different things here, obviously, which is very fascinating. So this is a different solution that you're working on than TapSOS. Before we jump into that, tell me the mechanism. So how does TapSOS function, the default version?
It's something I always forget to explain. I always run away with the idea and why we created it, but people always say,
I'm a very simple and crude man.
So TapSOS is a smartphone app and it can be downloaded from the app stores. It's available on iOS and Android. Once you've downloaded it, it's not really to be downloaded during an emergency. It's recommended that you do it whenever you are sitting in the comfort of your home. You have it pre-installed because we allow you to create an account and set up some profile information about you, and that's all stored there and then sent directly to emergency services during an alert. And it would be information about you that if you were on a 999 call, that would be kind of the standard process of gathering all information. It can take a long time. confirming who you are, your gender, your age, where you live. All this detail is collected, but on the app, we have it all there pre-populated, so it just saves time as well then.
Can you tap which emergency you're experiencing as you go through it?
Yeah, so once you've got your profile created, the process of creating an alert is very straightforward. The first screen you're faced with is which service do you require? Is it police, ambulance, fire and coast? And we allow within the app all four to be reported to. And then it's identifying, well, where are you? You can confirm that through GPS. It's again very quick. There's times where, again, I've heard horror stories where people are in an emergency but don't know because they may be driven through a town or an unfamiliar road and like, I have no idea. You know,
that's
you can
easy
see
to imagine.
something up there.
I wouldn't know half the time. Yeah,
same. I can maybe say I'm close to McDonald's or close to this, but no idea where.
Figure it out. I'm near a McDonald's.
So service, location, what's going on. We have built or designed, I should say, kind of universal language icons just to kind of clearly identify what's the scenario. They're really visual, and again, it's quite good if we were like moving into other regions where English is the first language with all the icons that are understood with a little bit of short text. Yeah. So service, location, the incident, and then there's a few questions that are just in line with the 9-line triage. So questions like, is everyone breathing, any serious bleeding, and is everyone conscious? And that just helps kind of prioritize the call. If any of those was a no, they'd be straight on top of the list. So it's really just mirroring the 9-line call at the minute. We're limited in some way because of the systems in place currently with here in the UK, it's British Telecoms who manage all the 9-line calls. And their systems, as I say, were developed way back in 1935. And so things are old and rusty and need to be updated. And so we are only able to do so much. There's so much we can do with terms like audio, video, kind of more automated interaction, but it's just not been able to be handed just yet as smoothly as we wish. So it's all a bit of a bit by bit at the moment.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've used this, you've tested it out extensively. How much time does it take me, ballpark, to report what I need to report? So from the time I open the app, how much time do I need before I'm done with interacting with it?
Around 30 seconds.
30 seconds. So I open it up, tap service, tap the situation, tap a few different questions, and there. Now, it seems to me that this might be more efficient for everybody, even those who can speak on the phone. Do you believe that to be the case as well?
Yeah, it's something we've really been working on, is to make the process really efficient, really fast, and just smart. You know, gathering that information beforehand saves a lot of time. You know, you can imagine maybe if you haven't made an alert ever in your life, but you could just imagine that you're in a really stressful situation. It's quite traumatic. You're maybe saying things you've never seen before, or feeling very different than how you normally feel. And so trying to communicate during that circumstance is very difficult. You don't really know how you're going to respond until you're in it. And then quite often you might find somebody goes, oh, I wish I had something like that that was a bit more visual or a bit more, you know. And part of my design studying my master's, I was really looking at how do people communicate during high stress circumstances, and is listening or verbally communicating or texting or writing things down. How do people interact? And it came up on top that visual communication was so much more manageable. People, you know, your sound can be affected, how you hear, how you see, that can all be impacted by a very stressful situation. So might not be able to kind of communicate in the way you normally would. So highly visual icons is a lot more of a smooth process for that.
And you'd think your memory goes as well. Somebody says, "Where do you live?" You know, you have all these moments where the answers probably won't come as fast as they normally would, and all of that takes time. So it seems to me that this solution would be better for literally everybody, no matter who you are.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. I'm a bit biased towards that too, but I think...
But I genuinely do believe that now that I think about it. If I had all of the data pre-populated, my address, all of these things that would take so much time, And, well, let me give you an example. I don't know how it is in the UK, but I had to call the police. Very rare occasion in the US, but I don't know, a year and a half ago, I used to live in a relatively sketchy neighborhood, and I was woken up, let's say, 3 a.m. by 6 rapid-fire gunshots that were essentially in my apartment. That's what it felt like. It was actually right out front of the door. Somebody was shooting out a car, shooting out the windows. I think it was a warning or some kind of gang warning to somebody else. Anyways, I knew immediately that it was a gunshot. The first shot, I woke up and I basically had my finger thinking I need to call the police. But I remember, you're shaking and you're confused, and it was the middle of the night. I didn't have my glasses on, and I am sure that interaction would have been way better if a lot of that stuff was already pre-populated and it was just automatically sent, because I had to dial a number. I had to wait for somebody to answer, which takes a while. It didn't happen immediately. And then they have to ask you some very basic questions, and then they have to ask you some follow-up. So no part of that made me think that it was very efficient. And I'm
Yeah,
fully capable.
I've listened to a few 999 calls, and I've heard the call handler ask very simple questions. Can you confirm your mobile number? And sometimes maybe a mobile number is difficult.
Yes, I believe.
And they just, can you confirm your address? And the person on the lines, and they shouting the same thing on repeat, just what they're saying in front of them.
Right.
They're panicked, they're stressed, they just need help. Just send me help.
Right, just send somebody out here.
On its way?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's quite frantic, and the call handler has to stick to the kind of the book and go down the questions and get the confirmation as to where they are in their number. Whereas our app can do that instantly. The person's already given that information to you freely. And I do know, though, some people still want that kind of reassurance of speaking to somebody on the phone. For some people, they instantly feel like a bit more calmer, that they hear a voice. And that's all good and well if you can, and if that's possible for you. I think things will change. It's just kind of, it's a very new thought process of doing it through an app and not speaking to somebody. And it's something as a technology company we want to improve and build into a user's experience is a bit more trust about the technology. If you report through the app, it's gone. You can trust it. You don't need to check or do it again.
Right.
I think there's a fear of, has it been received? Is anyone going to communicate back? And the minute globally, there's nothing there in place for the two-way dialogue. And as well, the emergency services are still quite reluctant, particularly here in Northern Ireland, based on our kind of history. You aren't able to track where police or ambulance are. So it's been a bit of feedback from our users saying, I would love to know how far away is the ambulance, how far away is police. That information is not given out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And like Domino's Pizza, other food orderings or taxis, you can track it and you can see it right up to your door. And why can't it be done by an ambulance? I want to track my ambulance.
Right.
Where is it?
Security risk because people were destroying ambulances. I mean, what?
Yeah, a whole range. Particularly here in Northern Ireland, you would find that there would have been setups, maybe drawing them into a location and attacking them. In England, the priorities more around if somebody else's call came in on top of you and it was prioritized, so your ambulance was dispatched somewhere else.
You see them coming towards you, and then it gets diverted, and then you hate your life.
It's very possible. Ew. So it's just kind of, there's the pros and cons to weigh up there. Just do you really want to know, because it may change, and that could make you more stressed. Yeah.
An ETA would probably be better.
Yeah.
But so obviously, you've got the funding, you're building this technology. At what point do you start interfacing with either British Telecom or 999 or the government? At what point do you start saying, hey, we got to set up some kind of global protocol here?
So very early on, when I was applying for a bit of funding, it was actually my first bit of funding. It was £4,000. I thought that was incredibly a lot of money. Where I had written an application, submitted it, got the feedback, didn't get it. I was very disappointed. I was like, oh no, this is never going to take off. But a bit of the feedback was, have you heard of BAPCO? It's BAPCO, BAPCO, the British Communication Officials. And I went to them after getting this bit of feedback. And they were the organisation that kind of pulled together all these different industries that help support the UK emergency services. There's actually an American version called APCO, the American Public
Of course.
So this organisation tie everybody together and allow these conversations to happen. So very early on, we went to the conference, we got involved in meetings, we then became part of their app accreditation scheme, and that allowed us to get in front of the BT, British Telecoms, allowed us to get in front of the Home Office, the Cabinet Office, and large government departments to say, this is what we want to innovate, and we'll work with you to kind of make sure it's operationally viable and you can trust us. We're going to be very transparent, allow us to kind of work with you. So we were accepted onto that app accreditation scheme, and it took us 4 years to complete. So it's really painfully slow. But it means when we launched our app in 2019, we had been fully accredited, and all our alerts are handled by British Telecom. So anytime somebody uses our app, it goes straight to them and on to the most appropriate service, which just mirrors kind of an online calling system. But I think a more serious conversation now needs to be had. I came from a point of, I see a big issue here, things need to change. I went out of my way to raise the funds, bring together a team and design and develop it. And now we need to have those conversations with government to say, okay, so how are you going to support this long term? Because at the minute, it is one of our kind of own biggest challenges is how can we make this sustainable? We've got funds to get us to a certain point, but how are we getting the government to support this further? Because it is simply just another method. You can telephone, you can text, and now you can use the app. Right. Let's get that supported centrally.
And it's just foolish that here we are in 2021, it's closing, and that we can't do this natively. I can turn on and off a light in my house from 2,000 miles away. We have the Internet of Things. We have all of these things. I can order food to me in 5 minutes, all this stuff. Yeah. And when it comes to the most life-saving, vital thing, we're so far behind. 18,000 people a year. That's a huge number of calls being lost. So it seems to me that this is absolutely critical for the world to adopt this technology.
It's definitely a global issue and something that our technology can adapt and go into any region. So while we keep going on about being in the UK, it's something that can be just repeated somewhere else. And it's needed. There's a cross issue that we just need to tackle.
And certainly some kind of two-way street here where I submit it, but then maybe there's some codes that come back, like received, green check mark, it's received, or responding. Just a few basic pieces of info coming back, just so that you know this whole system. Because again, I imagine that this makes everybody's life easier, including the people who field 999 calls. I think that this would save them a lot of time and effort and work. And have you done a study where you've compared somebody with the same emergency hypothetical, just as test scenario, one person with the app, one person with their voice? Have you compared the efficiency side by side, and have you noticed any differences?
So we haven't done an official research paper yet, but that is something on the cards with our local university. That was what we were hearing from call handlers. That was their biggest pain point, was people were not communicating in the way that they needed to get the information they needed to hear in the right time to be able to get the dispatch sent. I think it's, we can see the comparison and say, versus 30 seconds, a call is typically 3 minutes. Like, where's the pros and cons there, Sure. In case this is more efficient, but we certainly want to do a more formal research paper into that, but haven't done it just yet.
Okay, I'll be waiting for that. So excellent. Okay, so the other thing before, I do want to go into your new idea, but in terms of, obviously this noble mission is a wonderful, wonderful cause that I also believe in. Do you have any kind of business model attached to this? Is there any way that it would ever make money, or is this more of just a charitable thing building society?
We are set up as a limited company, so we are set up to make money. It wasn't how I set off, which is probably the wrong way to set up a business. You normally start with how are you going to make money, what are you going to sell, whereas I just started with the opposite. I started off with, here's a problem, I want to fix it.
So did Facebook, for the record. You're on the right track.
Yes. There's so many kind of services and products that are free and available for people to use, and there's a way to make money. I do believe strongly that there will be a way to kind of keep it sustainable. I think particularly TapSOS, I was very uncomfortable with charging the end user. I
Of
kind of
course.
feel that the public feel that it's a free service. Now, it's
Of
not
course.
free. Their mobile providers pay on their behalf, but for the public, we think this is something that needs to be available for free, and I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
So our app had to be free, and it is free to download. Now, where it leaves us with a bit of a problem is, okay, so how to keep the lights on? And at the moment, as I said, we are reliant on grant funding, which is there and available at the moment. But long term, what do we do? And I think it's a fit for large companies and a bit of their CSR, who either globally or in the UK, depending on which region it's available, who wants to be seen supporting us. It's really good public facing good news story to say we are supporting the public to access this, and I think there's room for that. Down the line, as our volume of users increase, we may be able just to kind of help with pharmaceuticals, just understanding sickness and trends differently. In the profiles, we collect information about medications or sicknesses, conditions. Now, it's all private and it wouldn't be sold. It's all GDPR compliant, but it would just be more kind of patterns to see, maybe in Manchester and in England, there are this percentage of diabetics in this age category. And it could just kind of inform to kind of improve. Our ethos and our values is all about inclusion, access, and improving quality of life. We would never be very transparent with what we do. At the minute, we don't do any of that. But if we were to go forward, it would be very much just to better and to improve, and there would be no nastiness in there or any areas of concern.
You can imagine that it applies to healthcare in a broader sense, even non-emergency services. There are just so many different things. And to your point, we've got a global pandemic, COVID, all of these other things that can be tracked. It seems like this technology has wide-ranging implications.
As well, there's a simple question in our app at the minute, like organ donation, yes or no, opt in or opt out. And in the UK at the minute, it's currently changing, or they're pushing for it to change, but you have to say, yes, I want to be an organ donor, or I don't. Whereas in the future, it may move to you have to just opt out. And if you don't...
Right. Some societies have done that. I can't recall which, but...
I know it's a real big issue. Like, there are thousands of people die in the UK every year waiting on an organ. And, if our technology can help just kind of share that information, and usually it's just because they don't know what the patient maybe had decided yes or no.
Yeah.
And so it's just lost. And I think there's another area where just by having it in our technology, simple yes or no, it can maybe support another cause.
Do you know what we call organ donors in the United States?
No.
Motorcyclists.
Oh, yeah.
It's a joke.
I could imagine.
No, it's a joke. It's a joke. Sorry, very dark humor. But speaking of influential people who have the power to help you personally, 2017, you had a brunch meeting with Richard Branson?
I did.
You met him personally?
Yes, I did.
How did that go? What kind of a character is he?
That's actually a fun story. And it was just one of my many wild applications that I had spent time submitting something, no idea what to expect. I was invited to come along and pitch here in Belfast for an opportunity. It's through Virgin Film Business. So I prepared my pitch, went on stage. Now, Richard Branson was not around at this point. This was just kind of his team traveling around the UK, hearing startups and selecting regional winners to then meet Richard Branson in London. So we were chosen for the winners of Northern Ireland, and we flew to London in October 2017 and met him for brunch with Branson, it was called. You might actually see in the video here at the teapot behind me.
I do.
It's actually, that is linked to Richard Branson's meeting. So we were kind of encouraged to bring him a gift, and I thought, I have an app, like I can't really gift him anything. People maybe had products or, other different things that they could just give, like merch or something. And I thought, and also, what do you give a man that pretty much can have everything?
Right.
I mean, he's just gone to space, for goodness sake.
Here's a teapot, sir.
So we thought a bit like, how do we at least stand out? And also wanted to kind of also feature other companies from Northern Ireland rather than just myself. Like, how could I bring somebody else on board? as I go to this meeting. Luckily, we have a company called Suki Tea, and it's all about fair trade, really environmentally friendly tea growing.
I like it.
So they have their own little setup here in Northern Ireland. They're actually they're widely known. This is part of their set. So they have like a full little set you can buy. But I met them, spoke to them and said, look, I'm meeting Richard Branson. And the reason why I went to them was because I Googled him. I read lots of articles. I kind of had to find out a bit more about him. And everywhere in images I could see he's holding a cup of tea. And he mentions quite a lot how he makes big decisions around a cup of tea. He's fixed his wife over a cup of tea. It's just a lot of his like nice times or decision making, big life moments happen with a cup of tea in hand. And I thought, that's interesting. So he always mentioned it, and he loves English breakfast tea. And when I went to Suki Tea to speak to them, I said, we've got to think about what can we do to impress him or be memorable. And they said, well, he likes English breakfast, and that's not sustainable because the tea leaves from India and just completely destroyed that area. So what we do now, we're sourcing our leaves from here. So they had another area in Africa that they're saying it's actually more fair traded. We can see from start to finish the process, and we're using our leaves from there. So let's make him his own brew. It'll be a bit like English breakfast. It'll have similar tastes, but it'll be more sustainable. I felt great. So we spent a couple of hours. I normally take like a 6-month process, but we spent a few hours picking all the different flavors from start to finish to create his own Branson brew. So he had his own tea made from Suki Tea, and I brought that over to that meeting. But very down to earth. Like when I met him, very approachable. You do get quite nervous when you meet someone of his caliber, and you just think, what have I to say to you, and how are you going to listen? And one of the funny stories, there was a press officer there taking photos for the event, and I was last, and I'd seen there were 7 of us, and they were all going up one by one, and competition had been quite fluid and relaxed until the photos opportunity came, and people got really stiff and straightened up and neatened up and did all this. And the dynamic changed massively, and I watched everybody go up one by one to the stage to get a photo with him. When I walked up, I could see he was kind of tiring and thinking, oh yeah, another one, okay, a thumbs up or a high five, what will I do here? So I was watching all this, and I just went up and I just walked to him and gave him a hug, and he nearly passed out. He just thought, what on earth? But he loved us, and so much so that we nearly fell off the stage because he just grabbed me and gave me a big shake. I was like, yes, this is great. And I just said, why not? But yes, he was very approachable and really inspiring too. And I think I mentioned earlier how I'm dyslexic, and so is Richard Branson. So we had a bit of a quick chat about that, and just how do you manage that in terms of when you're speaking to people, when you're communicating through emails or preparing for events, talks, the whole works. So we managed to share some tips and advice. So it's a great opportunity, and something that, again, you never imagine you're going to have that opportunity. Applying for something, where's it going to lead? You have no idea. And so that's probably something I'd encourage people to do who maybe are listening today. It's just don't hold back. If you're a bit concerned or reserved about something, give it a go. Be confident.
What a wonderful story. I love that. That's such a great thing. And who knows, maybe one day he'll be a more public-facing champion of your idea. Maybe somebody like him is exactly what you need to get broader support. Also, Virgin Mobile being a telecom business themselves, right? So he's plugged in. You never know. It's easy for me to imagine that happening as you gain more traction, which is fantastic. I didn't want to lose the other parts. You're developing a second product. I don't want to lose that thread for domestic abuse that has to be fundamentally different than the way that TapSOS works. So knowing that this app might be deleted, knowing that there would be many circumstances where somebody can't use something like this, or they'd be monitored or controlled, how did you begin to solve that problem?
Yeah, so that really came about. I mentioned that during 2020, our team were faced with just observing the world and the mess that was unraveling. And again, just hearing the daily stats and news reports about domestic abuse. Our Prime Minister Boris Johnson was, doing publications on a weekly basis to broadcast and saying, stay at home, stay at home. At the end, you started to hear him say, unless it's unsafe for you to do so. And that was the only time he kind of excused you to leave your house, was only leave if it's unsafe. So you just, at that point, really identified this is a really big issue, and it's highlighting the severity of it. So as a team, we knew we were sitting on technology that could help, but we just didn't think it was appropriate for every victim of domestic abuse. So while people can still download TapSOS and are free to do that, it may be that those at higher risk wouldn't be able to. Yeah. So we looked at what we have built and then applied for a bit of funding that came up through Innovate UK to really tackle COVID-related issues. So what we were designing really fitted with their brief, and we managed to get a significant amount of money to then spend the next 6 months to design, develop, test, and roll it out. So we have a second product now. Our name of it remains discreet, just for the nature of the product. And it's similar kind of functionality, that it is a mobile app, but it's discreet and disguised, so it doesn't look like what it is.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it's very quick, so it wouldn't take 30 seconds to report an alert. It would be much quicker. It's still quite smart, so it can gather information and send that within a really short period of time. There's just so much more opportunity for that particular product. And it's a bit different with TapSOS. It's not public facing, as I said, but also there's a bit more business behind it. Commercially, we're looking to engage with police forces directly, so it would be centrally distributed from a police force. So once you become known, either through a service or police directly, if you've reported before or if you've come into contact with them, they then give you this tool for reporting. So we see that as a kind of a model that we can channel directly to police forces and have a license agreement with them.
I love that. That's wonderful. And maybe there's something you can go in business with game developers, like, it's Candy Crush.
I know. So when you think about it, there's so much opportunity just to kind of a disguised way of reporting.
And anybody would want to be on board with that, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, who would say no to that?
And as well, in the design of it, it's interesting you said a game. It's not a game, but you're thinking in a really good way, because we wanted to make sure that children could use this too, because we've also found that children aren't necessarily considered in the process. And very often, I think it's something like 70%, if not more, of the cases that are reported, children have been witnessed and been in the household, and they're never really accounted for. So either a child who's witnessing domestic abuse can report it on their device, or if they're experiencing it themselves, again, they can report it. So it's something that was easily understood, very quick, very user-friendly, and it took children into consideration.
That's such a wonderful idea. I saw somewhere I think it was in Europe, where they had those billboards or those bus stop ads where if you were at an adult height, it looked one way, and if you're at a kid's height, it looked different. And it said something. Clever. It's so clever, right? And so a kid, they see something and it says, hey, if you notice something, report it here. So awesome, these kinds of discrete things that people are thinking of. And this seems to be right along those lines. I love it. I can't say enough about the work that you're doing. I know we're kind of coming up on the end of our hour here, but it's absolutely fabulous that you have gone down this road and that you have discovered all of these other things from one simple encounter when you're 16 years old working in retail, of all things, right?
Yeah.
To understanding how, oh my goodness, there are so many people that this actually applies to. It's not just this one guy, Nigel. There are so many other people in completely different areas. Yeah. But it's wonderful that you are taking this upon yourself, that you are being taken seriously, because we need this, obviously. And I hope to support in any way that I can. And I hope that our listeners will also recognize that this is something that just has to happen. It's not really negotiable. We need to do this. If there's an iPhone 13, we need to do this.
Yeah. Something we always say, it's not a luxury, but a necessity.
Yeah, completely.
I really believe that.
It doesn't make any sense. Well, I do want to do a couple of little quick things to sort of wrap up. It's been a very big pleasure for me, so thank you already for taking the time. I wanted to do a kind of funny little prompt, so a quick, short thing. when we're taking on challenges in the entrepreneurial journey, there's ups and downs, there's highlights, and all of these bad moments. What is the most heroic moment of conquest in your journey so far?
Well, a probably serious answer to that would be just getting our accreditation. That took so much of my energy, determination, and grit. It's a 4-year-long process, 4-year-long process.
4-year process. Wow.
We just, I think, completing that, and we were up against a lot of grey, white men, and that was a challenge for me. I think just the industry was a difficult one to kind of get into, but we've done it. I'm very proud of that.
Well, if there's, the British government is known for being progressive, and well, that's what I think of when I think forward thinking. That's huge. Congratulations on achieving that accreditation. Fabulous. All right, next quick piece. What is the best piece of advice you've ever personally received?
I've received so many. I think it's quite a general one, but just give it a go. I think my parents were always just very motivational to say, why not try it? Like they weren't afraid of maybe the mistakes I would make. They encouraged me just to give it a go. And that definitely gave me the freedom to try things, not to be the pressure of, okay, I need to get this job, I need to be performing this way, I need to have a house, marriage, kids. So it wasn't very like a formal way of upbringing. So I think my childhood has a lot of just kind of just give it a go, try it.
Just give it a shot. So good. We touched on this earlier, but somebody out there who has noticed something in the world, they want to bring an idea. As you said, no business sense, you never thought you would be here. What advice do you have to somebody who doesn't have an idea yet, or they might have an idea, to actually bring that into the world?
I'd say let your passion lead you. It has come from me really wanting to connect with somebody else to then seeing how they connect with something else. And it's just kind of unraveled. I really didn't know to begin. So just being open again to try it. But deep down, you'll know what you feel strongly about and explore that. See if there's something in there that you just feel so strongly about, you want to support it and commit the time to it.
Wonderful ending thoughts. And now I want to give you the floor to send people wherever you want, so promote whatever you want. How can people support your mission? What can they do right now to help you out?
I mean, if you enjoyed hearing about us, continue joining us on this journey. Follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. And if you're in the UK, download the app. It's there and available for you to download for free. We always love to kind of hear how people are using it and how it's benefited them. So do connect and reach out. But yeah, get on board, get behind us and share it with any friends that you have that you think it could benefit. Or if you are in kind of the government realms or emergency services in your location and we're not with you at the minute, let's see how we can get TapSOS in your region. That would be great.
You heard her. That's what we need to do. Mm-hmm. I love it. Becca Hume from TapSOS, thank you again for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I can't say enough good things about what you're doing. Keep on going wherever it takes you. So glad that you're out there in the world and that you've committed to this. I look forward to this coming to the U.S. and to countries around the world soon. So keep at it. You've got another fan. And now that we're at the end of our hour, with that, the official part of the podcast is over.
Amazing. Thank you, Ross.
What an episode that was. Oh my goodness. I have goosebumps. Do you have goosebumps? That's how excited I am about her idea. It just thrills me to know that there are people like her out there who have committed to these most fundamental, most amazing things. I support her wholeheartedly, and I strongly suggest that you do the same. I want her technology to be all over the world, in the US, all over the UK, all over the EU, everywhere. I think she's onto something big, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for her. As always, if you enjoy this show, if you find value in these stories, please rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Subscribe, rate it 5 stars, leave a nice review, and above all, share it. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Share it with somebody who can help bring her vision to life, especially if you're in a different country than she is. So again, thank you for listening to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I really appreciate you more than you know, and I will see you next week.